Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Darwinian Delusions Live. And today with me is Jordan. Assalamu alaikum, Jordan.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. It's I don't know. Ramadan's been different, hasn't it? I've never read so much. I never had so much time, but it's the Tarawih, isn't it? And the masjids that I'm missing.
Yes. I mean, is this your second Ramadan?
It's my third. It's my third. Yeah. So.
And you started practicing in your first Ramadan. You were going to the mosque and.
Yeah. So my first Ramadan, to be honest, when I converted, I was still I had a Catholic fiance, and so I was doing iftar with her. So she wasn't fasting. We were going to restaurants, and I was just stuffing the food down. It was only really my second Ramadan where I started meeting up with some other brothers, and I was looking forward to this year actually doing iftar with other brothers and stuff. But now Ramadan's something that when it comes, I'm a bit like apprehensive, but when it goes, I miss it, man.
Yeah. So your job is quite physically. It requires a lot of energy, requires a lot of,
yes.
I mean, you're definitely going to be thirsty and it's going to be hot. I mean, how did you deal with that last year?
Yeah, so last year I managed it. The first year I had this kind of, you think you're Superman, you can go in and do it. And I was just doing the same amount of hours and it was hot. There was one day where it was like 30 degrees and I went out there and did like 8 hours tennis coaching. And it got to a point where I was dizzy and I actually had to. So my first Ramadan, I didn't manage to do the whole thing. There was one day where I sort of failed. So I made sure the next year I definitely planned it better.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the idea is to carry on as normal as possible, isn't it? But not to make it as hard as that. So I guess it's the middle ground, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on your job because if you're an office worker, I mean, it makes literally no difference to you.
Yeah.
There is something very powerful though, because I've realized that, last year in Ramadan, I was in the UK and Ramadan was very long, right? In the UK, it's what, 18, 19 hours?
Yeah.
And here in Pakistan, Ramadan's a lot shorter, right? So I noticed like this Ramadan has been a bit too easy in Pakistan because the Ramadan in the UK is quite difficult.
Yes.
So you almost don't feel it. You don't feel the full, like I remember what I used to do with one of the brothers is me and him used to go to the gym just before start, right? 1 hour. And it was the best gym session because your entire body's empty, but somehow you're hungry and thirsty, but you have so much energy.
Yeah.
Right. And then as soon as we broke our fast and we, just replenished obviously all the liquids, but you feel that emptiness in your body, right? You feel the suhoor you had in the morning is completely digested. You're running on zero. Your body self-cleansing, and when the fasts are shorter, you don't really feel it as much. So almost we're not doing it properly.
Yeah, I get you. It's interesting. I had the same experience actually. It made me realize that I almost feel that the body is designed to be food deprived, isn't it? Because when, like you say, when you've got less food, when you fasted, you have more energy, you feel better. It's now obviously we knew 1400 years ago, but people are now introducing fasting into specialist diets. Even bodybuilders are fasting. So yeah, it's we already knew.
Yeah, and there's also something else that human beings, we are the worst when we're comfortable, right? And we are completely paralyzed when we're overwhelmed, right? So there's comfort and there is complete overburdening, right?
Yeah.
A human being is in a state of flow, is in a state of peak performance when they are not too comfortable and they're not completely overburdened.
Yes.
Contemporary society has this idea that if you want somebody to be successful, you make them as comfortable as possible. That's not true.
Yeah.
Comfort kills creativity, creates lethargic behavior, unproductivity. So, and I think fasting is like that. It doesn't overwhelm you, but it is difficult.
Yeah, I agree. Completely agree.
So today we're going to be doing psychology of atheism. I know this is going to attract some of the usual atheists on the stage. They're not going to like this topic. So just before we begin, I want to highlight something, which is when we speak about atheists, right? We're not speaking about every single atheist or the average
Yes.
person. Like if you walk into Luton Town Centre, right, and you just stop a random person and you ask them, "Do you believe in God?" They say, "No, I'm not really sure," and whatnot. We don't mean that. That's the majority of people in the UK. We don't really
Yes.
mean that. What we're speaking about here is people who are positive atheists, who are evangelical, who want to spread it, who argue against it. We're not talking about the average person who may not believe in God and they're just completely ambivalent to all of these polemics.
Yeah. No, you're right. Because obviously, I grew up with many people that didn't believe in God, and many of them just didn't really care. It's only really when I converted to Islam and started debates and discussions that I found this kind of new breed of person that spends their life's work or debate on something that they claim isn't even a belief in the first place. So, like you say, the kind of hard atheist, and that is essentially the person we're talking about. And to me, my main motivation behind this is I feel that hard atheist often throws the accusation at the theist that they grab hold of religion because they need it, because it's something, it's a weakness, and religious people need to have heaven, to feel comfortable. They're not strong enough, and also they're not intellectual. So religious people don't believe in science, and so I find, and to be honest, it's just been, no one ever told me this, but when I go to places and I feel I'm speaking to someone and they're talking down to me simply because I'm religious, it's something I never experienced before. But why am I getting told that I'm a fairy tale guy, sky daddy guy, when I feel I've always thought I was a fairly intelligent bloke, but being in discussion with these hard atheists, I often experience that. And so it made me wonder, it made me sort of look into, well, perhaps if we threw it the other way, they're saying we're preconditioned into believing God. Is there evidence to suggest the other way?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely something I've definitely experienced as well. That if you're religious, if you believe in God, they assume you have an IQ of a fish. Right?
That's right.
There's this assumption that there's something really wrong with you. I'll give you a little experience I had. I was in. I'm not sure if you've ever been to join the Leicester Square Dawah team.
Yes, I have. I've joined them a couple of times.
Yeah. So right outside the Empire Casino, very busy. A lot of people walking around. A lot of chances of discussion.
I remember giving dawah to a couple of drunk gentlemen there. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. And it's open pretty much 24 hours. So what's interesting is I came across you could tell by the way he was dressed and the way he was speaking, quite a posh English lad. And when I was speaking to him, I said, "Do you believe in God?" And his attitude was a bit like, he was talking to me in a very condescending way. So I was just trying to keep it nice, and I just wanted to get his opinion. So he said, "No, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist." And I said to him, "Well, have you considered this?" And I gave him a very simple design argument. And he looked at me and he said, "I studied at Cambridge, so I'll probably have a different perspective to you." And he just ended the conversation there. He wasn't interested. And so that's the type of atheist I'm speaking about here, right? It's not the vast majority.
And I feel that's ingrained in our society now. I don't know if maybe I believed that once upon a time as well, where, like I say, religion is treated as a joke at school. And there is that kind of, we are kind of almost conditioned as a society, but that's a different topic altogether.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly, this topic is something that that for me, like you say, this isn't a dig at all atheists. Human beings are complex, and a lot of the evidence that I want to talk about a lot of the most famous philosophers and perhaps similarities they have, or events that have happened in their life, which may have pre-molded them into their journey into atheism, as opposed to it necessarily being an intellectual decision, as they may claim. Yeah. And there's plenty of, if you look into the biographies of various people, which I have done, there's very similar sort of stories that can be told. It can, and to be honest, I've always been interested in biographies. I've read Mike Tyson's biography, Malcolm X, many of the sports people. And when you look at biographies, it often, if you look into their childhoods, it often gives you an indication as to, perhaps why they've done, become what they've become, or perhaps certain character traits that they've developed. Yeah. So it's always been something that interests me. I think for me, the main thing that sparked me was, firstly, like I said, this kind of, you discuss with atheists and they're talking down to you. So I've always thought that's interesting. Where's that come from? Mm-hmm. And also I'm always interested in these atheists that they claim to be rational, yet they seem to argue always on the other side of theism. So, for instance, if they're arguing the Quran, a hard atheist will always be on the other side of inheritance. They'll always be on the other side of the beat your wife verse. They'll always take a side. So for me, this kind of indicates almost a not resentment, but there's something in there. They're fighting. They're fighting God, and like I say, these kind of feelings aren't something that people develop intellectually. They're often can stem from events that's happened in their life. And I did what really led me into this topic was I did Umrah with the EF Dawah guys.
Oh yeah.
And we were in the Prophet's Mosque, and a Medina University student came and did a little sort of lecture for us inside the mosque. A beautiful brother, and he was from because in the Medina University, have you been?
Yeah.
They've got like an atheist department where they're dealing with atheism and stuff. So.
Sorry, I didn't go to the university itself. I went to one of their lodges, but I didn't go to that place.
Yeah. So I think we were lucky enough to sort of get in there, and he spoke a lot about this, and this is where he kind of said, because I mentioned this to him, and he said, look, there's good evidence out there to suggest that a lot of these hard atheists that people look up to, they've actually made their decision a lot earlier than people suggest. And Dawkins is an example. If I just talk about Dawkins first, and if it's all right with you, Sabor, we're getting to maybe a few over the last couple of centuries, because I don't think you can go back much further than that, because atheism is only really a modern phenomenon, isn't it? I don't think there are many atheists at all in society more than a couple hundred years ago. It's just suddenly become a real phenomenon. So Dawkins is someone who went to a COE school, so Church of England school, and he was upset about sort of having to go to the chapel. So it was obligatory for him to go to the chapel, do the prayers. So at the age of 14, Dawkins had said to the teachers and got his parents involved, said, look, I don't want anything to do with this religion. And so they're already sort of, for me, maybe a sign that at a young age, at 14, when he hasn't done all this research that he's done now, something very much against religion. Now, the other interesting thing about Dawkins is that when he was 9, it was reported that he'd received some sexual abuse from a Latin teacher who was connected to the church. So again, these are events that would probably turn anyone against a religion, and so that's an example of perhaps where you can look at it. And like I say, these aren't clear-cut cases, and we're all different, and we're all affected by things in different ways. But I think Dawkins early on there's a clear case that he perhaps was his hatred towards or resentment towards religion was pre all of this studying that he did. Does that make sense?
You built up a very powerful image, I think, in the minds of everybody, that a 14-year-old Dawkins who's showing this brazen, bold opposition to religion, he doesn't have the nuances of the Cambrian explosion and natural selection's creative power, and it all seems pretty much like it's just reverse engineered, that he's already pretty much set in his ways.
Yeah, that's right. It was almost like he searched for that way. It's not like he got two arguments together and thought, well, this one is stronger than this one. Yeah, I think it's clear to see. And we'll talk about a couple more.
Okay, but just to a point on that, I didn't know that he went through this Latin teacher who, I mean,
it's in biographies.
Stuff.
So yeah, and like I say, these events, I'm not saying that anyone that goes through these events automatically become atheist, but like I said, because we're all different, we're all complicated, but I think it is a clear case. So Freud, Sigmund Freud, we all know. I'll talk about the famous ones. He sort of some of his early work. I've got a quote here where he says, "Psychoanalysis daily demonstrates to us how youthful persons lose their religious belief as soon as the authority of the father breaks down." So Freud is saying there that when a young person loses respect for their father, it can then become very hard for them to actually develop a faith for. So really, we're talking about a link between the earthly father and the heavenly father. Do you know what I mean? Right. So the link between the father and God, and that's a lot of the direction where I want to go down is these atheists' relationship with their father and how the psychology of that affects then their perhaps struggle to then form a relationship with God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and when you complete your point, just remind me to tell you a story of an atheist who, sure, when we brought up something about his parents, his reaction. So I want to tell you that once you get into it. I totally agree with this line of reasoning.
Yeah. So we've got Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, obviously probably the most famous, I'd say. So he, and we'll go a bit more into these guys, but I wanted to just use these couple of quotes to set out what we're talking about here. So he said, "I have absolutely no knowledge of atheism as an outcome of reasoning, still less as an event. With me, it was obvious by instinct." So there we've got sort of, one of the flagship atheists admitting that there was no reasoning to his atheism. It was something that he felt inside him. So therefore, I think you can then deduce that perhaps this wasn't an intellectual thing that he, because of all the research he'd done. This was something that had ingrained to him. So then we can look into his childhood and see if there's any sort of connections there as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a bit shocking actually, because I mean, obviously Nietzsche is very famous, and he's famous for God is dead and seen as sort of father of nihilism. And I had no idea that he completely bypassed all the reasoning and it was like it's just instinctual.
Yeah, and that's a quote from him. Is that he said it was it wasn't his atheism isn't an outcome of reasoning. So therefore straight away. So
and for a philosopher as well.
Yeah.
This is a small fish.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a pattern here. There's an interesting pattern.
There is. So if we talk about so there's a psychologist called Paul C. Vitz, and he's got a fantastic book called Faith of the Fatherless. I'd recommend to anyone on this topic. So he talks about a defective father hypothesis. So if we go back to the idea that perhaps when a young person, if their relationship with their father is affected, it can affect their religious beliefs or their effect with God. So he puts it into three categories. He puts it into an abusive father, a father who's not around, who's not present, and also a father who passes away. Yeah. So with a lot of the famous so if I go through some of the names and then we'll talk about them. So Nietzsche, Hume, Russell, Sartre, Camus, Schopenhauer. These are all famous atheists that their fathers had passed away from a young age. So David Hume, his father died at 2. Bertrand Russell, his father died at 4. Sartre's father died when he was nearly 2. Camus 1, and Schopenhauer's father committed suicide when he was young. Whoa. Nietzsche father passed away at 4. So and like you said, Nietzsche is someone who's go on.
Whose father committed suicide?
So that was Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer, right? Okay, because that just reminded me of a friend I had at school, and he was a militant atheist, which again is not really is rare even at that age, and his mum actually committed suicide in front of him as a child. In front of him, this is really fun.
Yeah, that would be tough. And I think because obviously as adults we know that when someone passes away, we don't necessarily hold God responsible. Well, some people do, but to a young person, to a child, in psychology they say that the child still sees it as like an abandonment, or a weakness. So. And if we look at Nietzsche's example of that, so like you said, he's famous for saying God is dead, and he quite strongly rejected Christianity. And Nietzsche's father was a pastor who, like I say, died at 4. And Nietzsche was bullied at school because he was the sort of the pious kid of a pastor. And so then he was his father died, and he was then raised by the females in his family. And so in his biographies, there's a lot of talk about him being insecure about his manhood and things like that. And that may sort of give reason to why he went into this kind of Uberman, Superman theory, his kind of will to power and his kind of insecurities.
So where's the insecurity come from? Sorry, I don't understand.
Where the insecurity will be by being raised by just females.
I see.
Yeah, then there's an insecurity about your manhood. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in his biography, Nietzsche describes his father as a weakling and sickly, lacking in life force.
What?
And yes, and this is someone who, and I think he's.
This is some deep stuff.
Yeah. And like I said, this is from biography, so anyone can go and check it out. And his biography was actually called In Search of the Father. And so one of the biographers actually describes Nietzsche's life as the permanent quest to sort of find his father. And so Nietzsche was very much created this kind of, I think Hitler was one of the persons that followed his kind of Superman theory, this, will to power, denigration of women. And it was almost his projection of an ideal father figure that he'd projected. But again, like I say, he's an example of someone who his father passed away very young. And so again, you could argue that he had when he says God is dead, you could put this correlation between his father and God.
Yeah. This is really strange.
Yeah, I found it fascinating, Sabor. Like for me, I'll be honest with you, I'm not really. I mean, I did a little bit of philosophy at school, but it's at the moment I love reading about Islam, and I'm trying to learn about as much as I can on that topic. But when I started to look into this topic, and like I said, mainly because it's the accusation thrown at theists, and that we are holding on to something. But I think there's some. I'm not saying this is conclusive evidence, but this is definitely food for thought, and definitely perhaps holds the mirror up to hard atheists as to maybe it isn't always intellectual. Maybe they aren't intellectual godfathers of the world. Maybe they're just like us. Maybe they're fallible people that are also looking for things.
I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, the names that you're mentioning, they're obviously household names from a philosophical perspective, but the sort of analysis you've done here, I don't think most people, even within philosophy, have thought about this, because there is definitely a link between your childhood and the beliefs that you hold later on. Right?
Yes.
So that dictates it. But
yes.
The fact that a lot of them did not have fathers, this is very interesting. Yeah,
well, in Islam, Sabor, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we obviously believe, the father is, and the reason I'm saying this is because obviously a Muslim man can marry a Christian or Jewish woman. So I think that suggests that it highlights the importance of the man in terms of the religious side of the household.
Yeah.
So I think this highlights it.
Yeah. I just wanted to read out a comment which is very interesting from Rain. I had a conversation with an atheist who said he would agree with Islam, but he needs a God who is a father figure, not a God what Islam represents. I didn't understand it then, but I do now.
You had Yusuf, didn't you, on here the other day? Yep. Which I thought was fascinating. I'd love to chat about him, because he said that he linked his atheism to his father. I don't know if he said his father passed away, or I don't want to misquote him, but
his father passed away, I think, when he was 8 or 6, very young.
Yeah, and it was interesting for him to have that kind of acknowledgement that maybe his atheism will link to that as well. So it'd be fascinating to. But look, we can go through. I won't bore people to death with it, because I've got
well, I'm going through the comment section, and I don't think I think you've actually alerted people. I don't think anyone with this information. I mean, I'm actually really surprised at this, because I usually when I summarize the psychology of atheism, I don't bring in parents. I usually just stick to arrogance, and this for me is a paradigm shift.
Yeah, and I'm not. This isn't supposed to be an attack or getting personal with these. I'm not, because we'll talk about Hitchens later. Obviously, he's passed away now. I'm not here trying to sort of I don't know, put bad, throw mud at them or stuff. I'm just trying to make people think that that perhaps and like I say, it's only because they're throwing one way, they're throwing it at theists. It's basically used as a weapon. This kind of theists are people that this God projection that Freud talks about, that we are just projecting an almighty being that we need and that we desire and everything. But I think if you hold a mirror up to atheists, and if they're even honest enough to look into why it's because it's not why are they atheists. It's like you said quite rightly at the beginning, Sabor. It's why are they so hard atheists? Why are they why are they resenting God? Why are they spending their whole life's work trying to prove something or trying to debunk something? And to me, that's interesting in itself. I for instance, don't understand why an ex-Muslim would create a channel and talk about something that it doesn't believe in. For me, it's just bizarre. I can't imagine going around saying I'm an ex-atheist and then going attacking that. That's not, I don't get the motivation behind that. And so for me, the psychology aspect of it is very interesting.
It sounds a bit bizarre, but if I did become an atheist, I would really hope that nobody else becomes one, because as Douglas Murray, who you probably know is no friend of Islam or no friend of, well, definitely not a friend of Islam, even he speaks about in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, about faith as long as somebody else believes it.
All right. Yeah.
You need a society in the background, the ideological oxygen of faith, that life has some form of meaning. Like, don't worry, mate, he's in a better place. Or, you'll get over this, And it's not necessarily about people being religious. They don't need to be religious, but they could be, for example, coming back from the pub, right? A guy could remember that, I don't know, his mom died of cancer or something, right? And then his mate's like, it's all right, she's in a better place. Like, that ideological oxygen of religion, that may be the only time he thought about religion, maybe in 5 years. It's not like it needs to be visible, it needs to be continuous, but you need that ideological oxygen of meaning, purpose, something.
Yes.
And it's very interesting you said this, because there's a brother who I just spoke to today. So he became Muslim 10 years ago. He contacted Ira and, we spoke to him and he became Muslim. His way of coming to Islam was qadr, predestination. So
interesting.
his son committed suicide. His other son was like disabled or something, or like he had not disabled, I think he had a drug problem. He left his wife, obviously. Then his mom died. And he was going through all this trauma. And then he just went to go look for some faith, to go look for some meaning behind it. So the first thing he did, being a, white working class guy who knew nothing about anything. So the first thing he did, he walked into a church. And he just didn't feel satisfied, right? And then when he found out, in Islam, there's a thing called qadr, which is everything is predestined. So everything is, a lot of people think qadr, predestination is like a philosophical problem. He found consoling that, look, no matter what I go through, no matter what I'm going to go through, it was meant to happen anyway. I couldn't avoid it.
Yeah, because normally people are upset with the free will and predestination paradigm, aren't they? But subhanAllah, this is interesting that he's taking it that way.
Yeah, and then when I spoke to him, that was the cause why he became Muslim. Because it freed him of regret. What if I did this? What if I did that? What if I did this and my son didn't commit suicide? What if? And the Prophet upon him, he teaches us not to have that line of reasoning, not to open up the door of shaitan by thinking about what if I did that.
Yeah.
You have to remember that depression and regret is based upon experiences that people have had and time that they've wasted and things like this. Yeah,
it's interesting. You had a guy on here the other day that was inspiring. Obviously, the guy who was paralyzed and still, because a lot of the yet still keeps his faith. And I always refer to the brothers and sisters in Yemen who are struggling to get their next meal yet are still praying. and yet you've got people perhaps here that you see that leave Islam because maybe, why is my life like this? Like Allah owes you something, like you're entitled to a good life. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to see the reasons behind this, definitely.
Yeah. And there's something which I always try and highlight on this live stream and also in our general dawah training, and when I'm speaking to the brothers, that it's a cliche to think that if you give somebody enough rational justification, they'll become Muslim. This is a cliche. To recognize the idea that there's a God, that's easy. That's nothing, right? But it's about showing people that actually we as the Muslim community, we are your brothers and sisters, right? That we're all connected. This thing has a huge impact on the psychology of people, right? Because a lot of people are looking for fulfillment. They're looking for gaps within their, within their life. Father figure that passed away, or they never had a good relationship with their parents, or something else, or they love their wife and their wife passed away. And the Muslim community has to come together and have this type of brotherhood. Because if you look at the early Muslims, when Allah mentions them, Allah doesn't just mention their commitment to Islam in terms of prayer, their commitment of Islam in terms of fasting. I mean, when the Sahaba are mentioned in the Quran, they're mentioned as brothers, right? Very interesting. And I think I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. A sister who apostated from Islam, she was a revert sister. And when we asked her why she left, she simply said loneliness, right? So what you're saying is true on the atheist side, but we also need to apply it to the Muslim side. We also need to recognize when we're just as fallible when it comes to, if atheists are affected by their past experiences, it makes them more likely to be atheists.
Yes.
Muslims are more likely to leave Islam or be disenchanted by Islam because of a lack of emotional, psychological fulfillment.
Yeah, and I think, and I wanted to, it's probably a summary for the end, but I can mention it now because it's linked. When I went through this research about, the link between a child and their father, I think it also it's significant for us as Muslims to make sure we are that father then that isn't absentee, that is strong in their faith, that is there for their child. And it's not being a macho father, but it sounds like even that ability to build a loving relationship with a child is crucial, because if they don't have that, if they can't build that with their father, I think then it becomes a struggle to then build, because I think a child looks at you essentially at a young age as their kind of authority. And I'm not going to say God, because obviously we believe differently, but then obviously as they get older, then they have to then develop their relationship with a higher being, with God. And I think if it hasn't happened with the father very well, then that's where I think there can be resentments and people turn away. Yeah,
and this sort of reminds me of, if you look at the southern states in America, those states are very conservative, Bible-believing Christians, very strong in their belief in God, and they're very strong family values. They don't commit fornication. They have very good relationship with parents. Parents spend a lot of time with children. In fact, my wife was doing a lot of research on homeschooling, and the best homeschooling stuff you're going to get is from North American moms, right, who are like homeschooling experts. And it's so intimate, the relationship between the child and the parents, to the point that I was watching a documentary about Mormons, and there's this place in America called MTC, Mormon Training Center. And all these Mormons come there and they all get haircuts and they all live there for 2 years and they eat there and they go all across the world. And when one was getting a haircut, he said, "This is my first haircut outside of my house." Normally, within their house, the children get haircuts from the parents. That's how close they are. So it's no wonder that they're also believers in God.
Yeah, 100%. There are a couple that leads me on actually to. Is there? Have you heard of Ludwig Feuerbach? I don't know if I said that right. So he's a famous atheist. He actually came up with the projection theory before Freud did, actually. So he was sort of the originator of that the religious people are just projecting this image that they need. And he's his father left his family for his friend's wife when Ludwig was very young, and they actually lived in the next town. So imagine your father meeting another woman, and they had a child and everything, and grew up. So they left you, and then I believe when the mistress or the passed away, then the father then came back into the family. But again, there's a this is someone who with a father, an absentee father, a useless father really, and then in his work you can see he rejects his father and therefore rejects God. And I think another example could be Hitchens actually. Do you know Hitchens' background, Christopher Hitchens?
No.
So his relationship with his father wasn't particularly close. His father was in the Navy and fought against the Nazis. Hitchens did respect his father, but his father was kind of into like athletic prowess, and he saw sort of Christopher Hitchens as sort of like a kind of a geek, with his books. So he in Hitchens' biographies talks about his father maybe seeing him as a bit of a disappointment. But his mother met a new guy, an ex-priest, behind his father's back when he was young, and they apparently ran off to India. But I think they travelled a bit together, and the next Christopher Hitchens had heard about them is that they had committed suicide in a hotel in Greece. So this ex-priest, who he keeps referring to as ex-rev, linking him to Christianity. And his mother actually made a suicide pact, and both committed suicide.
That is so tough. That explains a lot. It's almost like someone gave me a different color to look at Hitchens with.
Yeah, but if you look at that, I almost sympathize with these guys now. I'm like, well, no wonder, if my mum ran off with someone who I saw as a Christian priest, in that background, and ended up, convincing my mum to commit suicide, you'd hold them responsible. And from a young age, what this can do to you, even if it's subconscious, they may not even be aware. But I think, you can't ignore these kind of these backgrounds. Look, they're holding themselves up as atheists, intellectual atheists. So I think looking into people's backgrounds, famous people, gives you a good indication of perhaps why they believe what they do.
Yeah, what you're saying is it's just shooting off some activity in my brain. I just remembered of an ex-Muslim who is a evangelical atheist, right? And he's from a Bangladeshi background. He lived in East London, and in East London, his father was cheating on his mother, but not cheating in the sense that he was going around the corner and meeting a girlfriend or a prostitute or something. He actually brought over his mistress to his house, and he used to sleep with her in a room while his mum was also in the same house. He used to openly do that. And that was his father for him.
Yeah.
And I just thought this now. I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. This atheist.
Yeah, and interestingly, there's been people that have done research into the sort of the theist, the theist philosophers, and have found that there is quite a lot of them that have stable backgrounds. And like I say, I'm not saying that this is all atheists have had tough childhoods and all theists have had beautiful childhoods, but I think there's definitely something linked to that resentment to God, through their fathers. And I personally feel from the evidence that I've seen in biographies that there's definitely a case for people sort of predetermining their journey. So and that's fine as long as they're honest. It's not like these atheists had all the arguments on the table, had an unbiased head and looked at it all and thought, well, okay, I'm going to reject God. There definitely seems to be something that's led them one direction, and they've pushed themselves that way.
Yeah.
And I think other ones. As a side to philosophers, you've got people like Stalin and Hitler as well. A couple of atheists there that you can look into that were both beaten by their fathers quite badly.
Okay, tell me about Stalin, because he was a vicious atheist. Hitler, it's arguable how much of an atheist he was. There's some disagreement about whether he was. But Stalin, give me some details on that, please. If you
Yeah,
have.
so Stalin was is I believe his father was an alcoholic and used to beat him and his mum. And the reports were quite bad. They were bad beatings. So yeah, and that's about as far as it suggests for him that I saw. But I think that again that is a father, that is a defective father, a useless father that perhaps. And I believe his father was religious. So if you're getting beaten up by your Christian father, again, it's and look, I mean, Hitler is someone that you could argue wasn't religious, but I think you could definitely say that he took religion away from Germany and put himself in that God kind of place, didn't he? Kind of everyone followed him. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Saboy. It seemed to me that he put himself as the moral figure of Nazi Germany. And took religion away almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange. It's a very strange thing when you consider it. But religion or religious sanctification is inevitable. It's impossible to evade. So, as an example, if we look at North Korea, we look at communist Russia, communist China. There is a continuous father figure. So Kim Jong-un, Mao, Stalin, Lenin, and have a lot of religious symbolisms.
Yeah.
So statues, right? You have statues of these guys. Apart from the statues, you also have with some of them unrealistic stories about them, right? They did this, or they did this, and they did this. There's a huge. I mean, if you really think about it, what is the point of Lenin's body still being in state and people are coming and viewing? And if you look at the videos from the early 20th century when Stalin died, the black and white footage of Stalin's funeral, you could swear that this is a Christian funeral.
Yeah.
There's women in veils, there's people crying, there's a whole, the way people are coming and giving their respect. And then they continued it. And he was like the father. So, I mean, this makes a lot of sense. And that earlier story that I want to tell you, so there was this apostate, ex-Muslim, who, he was trying to give all his rational reasons why there's no God, X, Y, Z, but all of those were just excuses. And when we pushed him on his parents, right, he literally flipped out. Like, we just wanted to, we just thought, okay, there's something about it. And then later on, he literally, the guy just broke down. He was crying. He was in tears. He was shouting. And then when he calmed down and we spoke to him, we found out that he'd faced physical assault from people that were supposed to be religious.
Yeah.
And there's so much of this, overt religion in the house, when in reality, the things that he told us, if we take at face value, it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that. Okay, so I want to ask you this, right? So, do you think it's a case of this fatherlessness mixed with something else? Because I can think of examples where people, they don't have fathers, but they're not necessarily as anti-religion and this type of thing. So what are the additional, I mean, it's a necessary thing, not a sufficient thing.
Yeah, I agree. And like I say, it is very a complex issue, and some of the research done, some of the people that had replacement fathers would often be in a better position than obviously if your father just left completely and then you had lack of father. So obviously some people lose their father, but they're still able to get that support in other ways. But there's no written formula to this, and I think you're right. There probably is something else going on here, and I think we are, a lot of the examples I've given is the father's linked to religion as well. So I wonder if the father was an atheist, for example, would they then view him religion in the same hatred? Because it seems to be in a lot of the things I've mentioned, the do you know what I mean? The father is kind of a symbol of religion and a symbol of God to them.
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that makes sense, because in the cases that I can think of, that was the case, that the father was, seen as a good person, religious person. So with Stalin, what's interesting is,
well, he killed thousands of priests, didn't he? He really went after the Orthodox Catholics. So it wasn't just an atheist mindset. He really went after the religious as well, didn't he? So there was definitely some resentment in there from him.
So it's quite interesting that he destroyed churches, persecuted Christians and Muslims in the South, and Jews as well. What's interesting is I was listening to Putin speaking about the communists. And I didn't really know this. For some weird reason, I thought Putin was an atheist. I don't know why. And I basically realized he's not. He's actually close to the church, the Orthodox. And I found something quite interesting, that Putin is bringing back religion in a big way in Russia. In fact, one of the reasons for his Syria involvement was not just a geopolitical, but it was also a cause, but it was also that he was trying to show the Orthodox Church is here as a defender of Christianity. He had these, because Syria is obviously the birthplace of not the birthplace, but you have ancient Christian communities that still speak Aramaic in Syria. And what's interesting as well is that he said, somebody asked him about God, right? And he said, look, this is a personal thing. I don't really like to speak about it. But he said, those previous communists who said there's no God, I don't remember his words exactly, but he was basically, from what I remember, saying that they were trying to resurrect God as something else. As in, you can't basically kill God.
Yeah.
And he said that, well, anybody who stood up in the trenches in the World War when there was death all around, he knew that there was a God.
Yeah, that's right. But you're right. You know what? People that have taken God out of society are essentially trying to replace it with something else. And that was what Nietzsche was doing. He was saying God is dead, and he was trying to replace it with this kind of superhuman, the Uberman theory. And I think they're definitely. It's not like they're just not believing in God and then happy to continue. There's a search, so there's still something inside them. Obviously, we would argue they still have the fitra, and it seems to be a confused. They're in a confused state. But another thing, Sybil, which was interesting, the findings, because it further highlights the relationship with the father. Is I don't know if I've met some people at Speaker's Corner, perhaps, that I would, and I don't know for sure, but they seem like they have some autism, perhaps. And there is some studying to be done between the relationship between autism and atheism. And the reason being, I think it's something like 4 out of 5 people who are autistic are atheist. And the reason being is that autistic people, whilst very smart, they really struggle to form relationships with people, including their fathers. So an autistic person, for example, will really struggle to develop that loving sort of relationship with the father, and hence move away from God. So there are, like I said, this isn't conclusive, but there are that was a highlighted area of the study that I saw.
I've never come across anything about autism and atheism, but I do know one thing about. Autism, of course, is a spectrum. And
it is.
I know some people who are like I know one person who is autistic, and they are like almost like an extremist in Islam. Not an extremist from the perspective of violence, but extremist from the perspective of, okay, this time you need to do this prayer, this time you need to do this time. Like, they're very robotic with their worship. But there is an interesting thing about autism, that autism is and by the way, if anybody in the comment section can correct me on this, because it's good to be fact checked in the case I said something wrong. But a normal person like yourself, Jordan, they would process top down. So they'd look at, okay, so how am I going to plan my day? And then into things. So they'd do this bird's eye view, and then they'd home in to tasks that they need to do, they'd prioritize. So it's top down processing, right?
Yeah.
people are brilliant scientists, researchers, writers, because they can focus endlessly on a niche area, and they blur out all the noise of the bird's eye view. So they, in fact, do bottom-up processing. They go from the particular to the general, when a normal person goes from the general to the particular.
Yeah, I think that fits the criteria what I'm thinking of, actually, thinking of the person. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. And
of course, atheism, as Imam Ghazali explained it, is like an ant walking around on a book and looking at the symbols, the curves, thinking they're just meaningless, not looking at overall that actually this is meaningful, valuable information.
Yeah, I agree. And there's, in terms of the autism, there's kind of a, it's, I guess not a theory, but it's generally accepted that autistic children, for example, struggle to understand that other people have minds. So they'll often say the wrong thing, and like I say, I think, because obviously we've talked a lot about perhaps traumatic events that have happened that have taken people away from God or their father, lost respect for their father. But I think that's an example where also, if you're the inability to develop a loving relationship with a father, because essentially when you embrace a religion, that's what you're doing. You are developing a loving relationship with your creator. And if you're someone that struggles with that, then you know, I think the research suggests that you may struggle in a God too.
Yep. I just want to bring up a verse. If you keep speaking, I mean, there's a verse which exactly highlights what you're saying.
Yeah. So I think, and the other thing we haven't brought up is women. We talked a lot about men, and we explained why perhaps the father is the important person. Even Islamically, the father is the one that, in terms of religious aspect of a child, is important. But you know, the reason why women isn't mentioned as much is women don't struggle so much with that relationship. You'll often find with women, what women do is when they, well, firstly, you don't see many hard atheists that are women, do you? You don't really see it. I haven't seen it. Many of them, if they drop something, they have no issue taking something else up. You know, many of the people I know they'll go and do Buddhism or yoga or the other thing. They don't really take this hardened position that the man does.
I mean, most of the, as you might know, or you might not know, the atheist movement went through a split around 2011. So first they were pretty much one conglomerate, not exactly. And then the splitting point was what's known as Elevator Gate in 2011, where you probably might have heard of this, the feminist Rebecca Watson, and you know, then other atheists started attacking her. She started attacking the fact that atheism is a white, male, toxic environment. And so, I mean, I gave a talk on this. I'll send it to you if you're interested.
Interesting, yeah. I think everyone I mentioned have been white males, so very interesting.
I mean, in fact, it's like, hopefully I can bring this up. There is feminist philosophers who are atheists who argue that New Atheist movement is a white, male-dominated, misogynistic lineup of speakers, and colored people and women are just there to stand around in the balconies, right? But the crux of the movement, remember, these are atheist philosophers, feminist philosophers, saying that, you know, the atheist movement is toxic, and they are, you know, anti-women, essentially. And what's also interesting, I mean, we can actually, I want to cover it's the relationship between New Atheism and sexual abuse of women, right? So a lot of prominent New Atheist speakers, Lawrence Krauss, David Silverman, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So these are big figures, right? And they've been linked to serious abuses of women, right? Now, the truthfulness of each case is obviously different, right?
Yes.
But for example, in the case of David Silverman, he pretty much he was the president of one of these American atheist alliances, and he was removed because of the abuse that he was basically doing of women. So, I mean, that's a separate topic I'd love to do with you, because you can do the research.
I think we mentioned Nietzsche before about his denigration of women, and he very much went at women. You know, Nietzsche's one of the sort of fathers that they all hold up as. And I remember seeing an article about Dawkins, and I didn't really want to mention it because, to be honest, it's an article that you may have seen, and it's been everywhere, about almost defending mild paedophilia. So yeah, it's essentially saying, oh, it's just child abuse. It's not. And again, I guess it's linked to this, which is, that's very interesting. But like I say, we're certainly not saying that all atheists are like this. But I think it's very interesting to see the similarities.
Yeah, what they highlighting, they're not saying being a new atheist is likely to lead you to this, but they're talking about the overall atmosphere is not very women friendly. We don't have enough women speakers. Because remember, the atheist movement, and this again, some feminists here may not like to comment, right? But obviously, this is what I believe they think. They're trying to show new atheism as macho atheism. So militant atheism, aggressive atheism. Women, by their nature, they're not as aggressive as men. Even a very vicious, woman would agree that most of the time, barring exceptions, men are a lot more aggressive. Now, if you're trying to portray a movement that's very, militarized, that's very evangelical, that's powerful, having a woman speaker doesn't create that, doesn't arouse the crowd, right, in the way that the male does. So I understand why the four horsemen are male. I understand why, you're not going to put a black guy or an Asian guy to try and rouse up a crowd of white people, right? I mean, the only time you can get a brown and Asian person to rouse up a crowd of white people is if they're white liberals, right? Not when they're new atheists, right?
Yes.
They have a narrative. So there's interesting nuances here.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you're onto something there. It's I guess I think the reason why I've highlighted many of them as male is that male is between the father and the male, and that I guess that's where sort of this lies. But it's interesting, especially maybe moving into, why are they, this is white misogynistic kind of side to it as well, which I haven't thought of. So perhaps add another string to the bow of this, because it's certainly an interesting topic. Because like I say, for me, it's purely a case of holding the mirror up, because how often would they say, the Muslims are all like this, the Muslims are misogynistic, the Muslims are this, that theists are people that just need to cling on to stuff. And at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat. They have the same issues, and they've made themselves into this, and they've done it really well. And I guess, like I say, it must be only a couple hundred years, because there's a historian called James Turner who mentioned that before the French Revolution, there was only a dozen atheists. They used to say that every village has a village atheist. And I don't know if I mentioned that before. And now now they're saying the atheist is running the village almost, where they've created this kind of atheism as the smart intellectual side, and the religious, and like I say, that the stuff that's thrown at theism is I think it seems to be very tactically done over time, as a way of kind of not denigrating, but kind of discrediting religion, and they've done it well, because it's in our schools, it's in our media. Religion is generally viewed as a lesser intellectual position to take.
And I think this is where it's very important. I'm trying to push this narrative more and more now. It's very important to speak about the negative aspects of the Western world caused by atheism, and the positive remnants that we have left, and the positive elements that we had only a few decades ago, being the product of faith in Christianity. This is a very powerful narrative, and the reason why it's powerful is because, firstly, we're not using Islam. So you realize an atheist is more likely to acknowledge the merits of Christians in the past than they are Muslims in the past, because of their ancestors. So there's that affinity. But also because if you look at a lot of the new atheist polemic against Muslims, it's like, look at us, we're great at science. Look at us, our societies are more civilized than you. Look at us, our societies have more justice than you. We're not as corrupt. We don't live on aid, right? We're not, we're not going to the IMF every 5 minutes. And a lot of this is correct, but we need to point out, hang on a second, you are simply, in the words of Abdul Rahim Green, you are simply living off the inheritance of your forefathers. So the new atheists and secularists of today, they're just recent. They're very recent. I mean, when you spoke about Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Camus, I mean, these guys, they did not represent the majority of Europeans. They were just in academia. And academics, they always, what their ideas, before they're transferred on, it takes about 100 years anyway. So it's very important to understand, and we should, I mean, of course, we have to obviously do it in a way that the missionaries don't use this as fodder against us. But I mean, I even had this conversation with Kay in Speaker's Corner before I knew she was a missionary, right? That I believe there is a big debt that the Western world owes to Christianity. And if an atheist tries to promote atheism through the success of the West, we can just turn around and say, sorry, mate, it's all due to Christianity.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And even the fact that, on a side point, even the fact that many of the people we mentioned were raised in religious backgrounds. So, that they, whether they like it or not, their morality and their upbringing has come from religion. It'd be very interesting that I mean, it's quite a scary thought to me, future generations of atheists. For me, it's quite a scary thought because, the lack of family values. And again, I'm not saying all atheists can't have family values, but I think religion plays a real part in society in keeping and it highlights keeping families together. Whereas the atheist movement is more likely to encourage sleeping around, deadbeat fathers. And again, all of this, I mean, we can talk about why atheism is increasing, and perhaps the links that we've said about useless fathers and things like that. We're creating more and more atheists kind of mindsets as we go along.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, even atheists or even nihilists and even people who are materialistic, and they even recognize the value of having certain religious values. And, somebody that comes to mind is, even though this person is technically not an atheist, I'm not sure what their faith is, but this rapper called T.I., right? So he was he was attacked in the media a few months ago because it was discovered that he was taking his daughter every year to do a virginity test, right? To make sure she's still a virgin. He doesn't want his daughter, who's I think 17 or 18, to go around and become an object for him.
Wow. And this is a rapper with the videos and everything, yeah?
Yeah, so what I did is I didn't know who T.I. was, right? I mean, I remember, my days of listening to this stuff was like Prodigy and, this is going on.
I'm with you. I wouldn't have been into that T.I. whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, the English garage stuff, right? Or other stuff I'd be aware of, but rapper like T.I. I don't have any idea. So I decided, okay, let me just Google this guy. Let me just put in YouTube. And as soon as I clicked T.I., all these videos turned up. And I was like, okay, because I wanted to basically do like a video on it, and I still haven't done it, but I wanted to do a video on it, right? So I said, okay, look, I need to click and watch the video. Yeah, even though I know it's going to be like bad women, but there's a reason I was doing it, because I didn't know what the content of the video was going to be, but I just wanted to just play it for a few seconds. I played it, and literally maybe 3-4 seconds, I okay, I got it. Literally the first clip of that T.I. video that I clicked on where he was rapping, and he was pointing his finger towards a woman next to him, and like she's an object, and there's this completely scant, she's hardly wearing any clothes, and and he's treating her like an object. And I thought, that's quite interesting. You never treat a daughter like that. So he represents for me the problem of new atheism.
New democracy.
They don't want a situation. They're trying to create a world which is liberal, which is, sexual freedom, this. But when they have their own children, right, they're like, be careful of boys and this and this and this, and men out there. Because, somebody said something quite interesting, and I want your thoughts on this. This woman put up this post, and she said, men who compliment women and then get them to do sexual acts, this is kind of rapey. Yeah? I mean, she was basically saying, what's the real difference between rape and a man who's very good with words and he compliments a woman a lot and then he basically has his way with her? And a lot of people that come, obviously I don't want to delve into your background, but
no, I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, a lot of people that I know who are reverts to Islam around your age and slightly younger, who've been through that. They've been through some years of this. They will attest to the fact that, give a woman a few compliments, talk to her in a certain way, and it's a very disgusting world out there.
That's right. The game, you're exactly right. And like I say, that you exactly point out the hypocrisy of the atheists, where porn's fine, but I don't want my daughter to be a porn star. Going out and sleeping around's fine, but I don't want my daughter to sleep around. And there's a complete. But you're right. I mean, if I take myself back to the club, I don't want to expose sins and things like that. Obviously, I was non-Muslim at the time, but yeah, you're right. I don't know about rape. It's a grooming process. It's a chatting up game. It's telling the girl what she wants to hear, giving her false promises. To be honest, you're allowed to go and ply them with drink in a club if you want, and if you were to then take them home, there's not really any consequence to that. So yeah, and it's encouraged. The worst thing is this isn't even frowned upon. This is every Friday, every Saturday night, and yeah, it's a scary world. And unfortunately, like you said, these TI characters that have become our role models. I said last time about James Bond, we're all trying to be that guy who can, chat up girls and then ditch them the next day and stuff. And it's it's scary where it's leading, because I think there was obviously the sexual revolution of the 60s and people enjoyed it for a while, but I don't know where it's leading now. I mean, it's getting to the point where it's getting ridiculous.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about, Prophet ﷺ, a young man came up to him and said to him, allow zina for me, allow me to commit fornication.
Yeah.
Say it's haram. He didn't give him a pure rationality. He didn't say Allah said it's haram, which is a logical point. He said to him, would you like somebody to commit that with your mother, with your sister, with your daughter? So that creates an emotion, and it makes you think that's somebody else's daughter. Now, since, alhamdulillah, I've been blessed with 2 daughters, and I literally, they're so small. There's one's 5, one's 3, and they're tiny. I literally sometimes just look at them and I'm thinking, I'm worried about the way they'll be treated by their future husbands.
Yeah.
Because if you have this attitude of, and it's a general attitude, right? You have rap songs that young Muslims are listening to. They may go read Tarawih, right? But when they're on the way back home, they'll be putting on their headphones. Women are being called hoes, right? And that old song, I've got hoes in different area codes. And, these types of things we don't really understand, but the Muslim community is absolutely just as affected as atheism.
Yeah.
I don't think we have the moral high ground here. There is definitely, look at, for example, the Rochdale or these other sorts of gangs and grooming. So we're not on the higher ground here. We're talking about conception. Conceptually, we disagree with it, but we're just as affected. I think the Muslims are just as affected as everyone else.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. And it is, I guess, it's something as parents, you must feel kind of powerless, isn't it? Because it's, if you're sending your kids to school here and things like that, they will hear this kind of music. They will, it's a challenge, that's for sure. And like I do feel, and I don't know about you, I do feel that there is a pushback of the last few years. I see all of a sudden people uniting with Muslims and Christians against things like, teaching masturbation at school to 5-year-olds and wherever it leads, that there has to be a pushback at some point, or I hope. So,
I mean, Abdullah Andalusi said something quite interesting. He was on this live stream a few weeks ago, and he said Victorians were more conservative than the previous generation, which was more promiscuous. And we seem to have this cycle. So, for example, if you look at the sexual freedoms of the 60s and the 70s, the 80s and the 90s were more conservative.
Yes.
If we look back at, they were basically just orgy parties. If you look at the 60s and 70s, these people are quite old now.
Yeah. Don't think about it. Yeah.
During their time, I was looking at this movement, and they basically were a bunch of white people who were following this Hindu guru, whatever he was. I think his name is Osho or something, right? And they just used to get together, dance, and it's just, they used to do sexual acts, and it's just crazy. And I think we go through this. We start to think, okay, I don't want my children like that. Then we get worse. I don't want my children like that. Quraysh, for example, a lot of people don't recognize the pagans of Makkah. Even they had very conservative values, right? They didn't have this idea of just going around sleeping with women. So even the pagans, even the disbelievers of this world, even they had better values than the values that atheism tries to promote.
Yeah. I wonder where it fits in, this kind of liberal notion that treat people how you want to be treated and stuff. But like you say, the whole idea of these women being our daughters, such a contradiction, isn't it? And hypocrisy, because, treat my daughter how you want your daughter to be treated, essentially. Should be the more their motto. Maybe they hit home harder because I
remember a few years ago finding out that when I was at school, from another school, because obviously when you're at school you have mates at other schools and stuff like this. There was a school party, and one of the girls got a bit drunk, as you do, and then some of the boys were like, ooh, we could just take her around our place. She wouldn't really know what happened.
Yeah.
And the teacher, who was basically like, who went to that school, it's a school party. She basically intervened, and she was like, you ain't taking this girl. Because at the end of the day, she was drunk, right? There was a bunch of boys, they could have filmed it. And then it's really evil stuff. She intervened. And the thing, if we really look at it, I can see in a couple of years from now, when you have a society which is so sick of this, sexual openness, that teacher and her action to intervene, which by the way is rare. You don't really find teachers like going ahead and intervening like that. I can see this in the UK. A lot of people developing this mindset.
And I hope so. So when for example, Zabor, when I mentioned sort of Friday night, Saturday night in clubs and stuff. So you'll go to a club, and obviously most people are getting drunk, tipsy, whatever. And then at the end of the night, people are looking for cabs to get home. And so when at the end of the night, you'll see swarms of girls. Some girls obviously left on their own, where they've maybe parted from their friends. They've maybe got a bit drunk. But what you notice, and this has happened honestly every club nearly I go to, if you're there till the end of the night, at the end of the night, you see these sober men appearing outside with cars and stuff, maybe pretending to be taxis, or maybe just offering lifts home. So these are people that are just literally preying on drunk girls coming out of a club. And that's not illegal. People don't seem to tell these people to get lost or go. It's just, And so, like you said, we're just allowing this, and like you say, hopefully there's more people like that teacher, because they're the people you want around if your daughter's in that position, aren't they? Or God forbid, anyone you care about is in that position. You need someone there to actually be saying no. And yeah, to me, that's what Islam is. It's looking after a whole society, not just this individual idea of I'll do what I want, regardless of the repercussions of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I try and do this 1 hour. I think next Thursday I'll bring you back, inshallah. We'll continue with the psychology.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot there. You certainly gave me some food for thought. And yeah, I'd like to thank you for that research, because, you know, stuff like this is, I mean, I've been dealing with new atheism for about 10 years now. And I thought I had things quite clued up, and now I'm sort of questioning myself. How I've missed this side of things, and it gives me a different perspective.
Well, you talk a lot about the psychology of science, don't you? Sorry, the philosophy of science as well, which is the same sort of similar thing leading before. I guess going a step back, and I guess I see this the same way. And yeah, it's like I say, it's a topic that for me, it's I hadn't heard before, and I feel like many atheists have sort of been let off the hook, have sort of been held up as this kind of, you know, perfect intellectual being almost. Essentially, these Dawkins and Hitchens are people's prophets. You know, that they are people who hold them up as smart people, and because they come up with that argument, they follow that argument.
Yeah.
And so if people realize that these aren't necessarily, you know, these aren't necessarily people that have made an intellectual decision.
Definitely. So thank you again for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Anytime.
And hopefully we'll have you back on Thursday, and we'll continue this. I mean, I don't think you need to do more research, because I think even we neglected the comment section, which I'd like to.
Yeah, maybe we can get some of that back. And there are some more still philosophers to talk about, but like I say, I think people get the gist of it. But,
yeah, no, I'd rather go through it properly, because each philosopher has a different flavor, and you know, we can sort of see things coming out. I mean, I definitely believe this is something you should write about. I mean, I always recommend converts to Islam to get into writing, get into blogging. I've neglected it. And, you know, YouTube videos only go so far. Writing has no battery, right? It doesn't run out. YouTube videos, you know, they go down, but writing is very searchable, very easy. And, you know, eventually a book, but I do recommend you start blogging, inshallah.
Yeah, not bad idea. Inshallah.
All right, bro. Jazakallah khair. And